Hey guys, we are on week 4 of the study on relationships. This is the last lesson specifically focused on our relationship directly with God. Over the past couple of weeks, we've seen how we are to have a relationship with God. We can have that through Jesus, that God is our Father, even better than our earthly fathers. We saw that in the story of Abraham and Isaac. And then this past week, what we saw is that we are his child, based on John 1, Jesus gave us the right to become children of God. And what does it look like to be a child of God? This week, we're talking about what's it look like to walk like a child. In other words, what's it look like to walk like I actually belong to God? And I think it really comes down to this question, and that is, as a person, do I actually change because I know Jesus? Like your kids, think about your kids or your grandkids. Why do they act the way they act? Is it the result of the people that they know? Is it a result of their parents? Is it a result of how they interact with their parents? My guess is it's a combination of all of those things. The influences and the relationships that they have, that all helps to influence how they're going to choose to act. So the question is does God actually influence us as his children to act a certain way? And how do we respond to that influence? I liked in the lesson overview, it says this lesson is being a teenager can be marked by entitlement and selfishness. And this lesson challenges them to more. Can we actually change? Can we move away from just being selfish? The world's all about me. How does that change? I like there was a story in the teaching prep about an older youth worker and a younger youth worker and how they were at some event and they saw tons of kids go to the front to say, yes, I want to accept Jesus. And the younger youth worker was like, yes, this is awesome. Look at all these kids. Look at them making these life-changing decisions. And the older youth worker's like, they do this every time. If we're not careful, we can kind of be like that. Just like children take a long time to learn how to do something. I just think of potty training, as we've potty trained now two of our 3 kids. They didn't get it right the first time. And it's not that we didn't give them the right instruction. It's not that we didn't give them the right correction in the moment, but it's like over and over and over and over again. Mistake. But eventually they learn from lots of repetition. When it comes to looking like one of God's kids, the same thing's true. It's repetition and consistent and repeated obedience is how we ultimately end up walking like God's children. It's not just about going forward and accepting Jesus at some big praise rally, but it's the constant in and out. So as far as the lesson, how I would teach it, I'm going to try to keep this brief. I think their opening illustration is a really good idea. It involves some prep on your part. I would take a couple of sheets of paper, 10 to 12 would probably be enough. And on it, you just write things that students may struggle with, like stealing, peer pressure, hatred, being mean, ridicule, anorexia, overeating, not doing your best, gossip, pornography, stuff like that. Write those on the sheets of paper and then have one blindfold. You can use something like a bandana or something. And then as students come in, the setup is that you'd have students standing around the room and one student is going to be the blindfold. And you can start out by being the voice of God. And so the way the activity works is this blindfolded student starts in the middle of the room and everyone around them, they're not allowed to touch them, but they're all trying to encourage them or influence them to step on one of those sheets of paper. You, being the voice of God, are trying to whisper, you're not allowed to whisper, the influence to try to help them not step on those sheets of paper, okay? And the biggest impact of this is to help our students get to see, hey, there's constantly influences trying to get us to do the wrong things. There's also an influence to try to get us to do the right thing. What influence are we going to choose to listen to, and how often will we choose to listen to that influence? You could do this multiple times, specifically our middle school students. I think they would really enjoy this. They get a kick out of getting to try to yell at their friend. There's a round 2 to this, and that's where the round 2 is the person who is being influenced. You can use the blindfold or take the blindfold off. I would say leave the blindfold on, and then you as God, rather than talking to them, you put your hands on their shoulders and you steer them. And you help and just help them see, like, okay, there's a difference when, like, I'm just like God's a distant whisperer and like God's got his hands physically on me. But we're opening this idea that, God wants us to walk like his children. And the primary text for this is 1 John 3. We've covered this text quite a few times in a variety of ways over the past year. I would encourage you to kind of break it up into chunks. Some of the questions do a really good job of just straight up saying like, hey, this is how you could break it up. So there's 3 key ideas. The first idea is that when you belong to God, you look like his child. And in this, the key idea here is that what does it mean to be righteous or pure? Or as the third question now, it says, does being God's child mean you will never sin again? And I think this is an important question to ask. If we belong to God, does that mean we're free from sin? We no longer sin? And the answer, of course, is no. But yet, it does mean that we begin walking in righteousness more often. And righteousness begins with us choosing to do things God's way, not choosing to do things our way. Some students would say, well, I can't help but sin. The devil made me do it. It's just so intense. I just have to do it this way. I don't know how I'm going to give my life to Jesus. It starts with choosing, God's way is better than my way. I'm not the one in control. God has to be in control. And ask them, what does it look like to be in right standing with God? Even though you belong to God, there's a difference between belonging to God and being in right standing with God. And if they need a further illustration, just consider their relationship with their parents. When they're obeying their parents, there's probably peace in that relationship. When they're disobeying their parents or doing things their parents don't want them to do, even though they still belong to their parents, they're not in right standing with their parents. And so being in right standing with God is doing things his way. The second big idea is that when you belong to God, you act like his child. So there's you look like his child, now you act like his child. We've kind of dealt with that. First question, verse 10 says, children of God and children of the devil act differently. Why is right living, consistent love for others essential characteristics that define God's children? Here we're really diving into the idea that, hey, your actions do speak. How you live, the way that you approach your school and the work that you're turning in says something. If you claim to be a Christian and yet you put zero effort into your schoolwork, what does that say about what God thinks about school? It says that either God doesn't take school seriously or you don't take God seriously. If we as Christians are known to be rude and lack manners and are the kinds of people that people don't want to be around, what does that say about God's children? On the flip side should be true. We should be the hardest workers. We should do the best at whatever we have. We should be the most mannered. We should be the most loving. It dives into the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis 4. And I would, rather than reading it, I would recap it. But, Abel was willing to please God. He lived like God's child because he was willing to sacrifice his best for God. Cain, on the other hand, he was like, God, you can have my leftovers, basically. I'm not really going to put too much effort into this. Difference being is Cain was blessed Abel received a blessing from the Lord, and Cain, got nothing. And Cain was mad about it. He was like, God, but why you favor my brother over me? And God tried to explain to him, because your brother is pleasing me. He's sacrificing for me. He sees me as being the best. And Cain just couldn't take it, so Cain killed his brother. It's the same thing's true for us as Christians, as people who claim we are the children of God. Are we living in such a way that we believe God's the best and therefore we sacrifice whatever for our God, for our Father? Or are we to go, God, you can have my leftovers. It don't really matter. And then the last big idea, point number 3, is when you belong to God, you love like his child. You love like his child. There's a good question, specifically high schoolers, about what phrases or ideas stand out most and why. Maybe it's time to do a quick recap and maybe have students break up into groups and reread and go, hey, what phrases, what sentences really stand out to you about how God's trying to communicate what love really looks like? Specifically verse 16 that talks about laying down your life for someone, like Jesus laid down his life for us. And that ultimately God is calling us to be sacrificial. I heard it said somewhere that you can sacrifice without loving, but you can't love without sacrificing. And I think that's true. We can make sacrifices even for things that we don't love just because it's whatever, it's just part of the grind. But when you love someone, when you love something, you can't help but make sacrifices for it. And the truest love is that, hey, I'm willing to sacrifice for this person because I think this is what is right. Helping them see the people that we're around, their friends, their enemies, their teachers, their parents, their siblings. If we're going to truly live like God's children, we're going to have to be willing to make sacrifices. And there might be some hard sacrifices we got to make, but that's part of it. Part of loving Jesus is sacrificing for other people. And we don't need to worry about if we will sacrifice too much because he gave the ultimate sacrifice with his death on the cross. As you wrap it up, one of the key ideas is when we belong to God, we want to live with him and for him. And in application questions, two of the ones I thought were really good is, what makes it difficult for you to live for Jesus 24/7? Not for other people, but for you specifically. You're asking your students to get vulnerable with this, asking them to answer personally and deeply. And I'd hold them to it. Don't let them answer abstractly like, well, some people, say there's not enough time, or what is it for you? What keeps you from doing it? And then, what are daily choices and habits that will help you look, act, and love like God's child? And if you need a take-home activity, if you need to push your students a little further, 3 things that I came up with is that since Jesus came to die for sinners, and love is sacrifice, Jesus sacrificed for us, love looks like sacrifice, who's one person that I need to be willing to sacrifice for this week? And maybe this stems out of, hey, there's a person in my class that's really annoying me. There's a teacher that's just grating on my nerves. There's a sibling, there's a parent, there's a bully, whoever. Who's someone that I need to sacrifice for this week? And on top of that, potentially, what's that sacrifice need to look like, right? Asking them these questions, helping them really take this and move beyond being a student who just goes forward at the big conference and goes, yep, I want to accept Jesus. I want to accept Jesus. I want to accept Jesus. We got to move beyond accepting Jesus. Move into, now we're beginning to live with Jesus, for Jesus, under the direction of Jesus. And as we do that, we begin transforming from just being people, not just being people who are called children of God, but we begin living like children of God. I've enjoyed these 4 weeks. I'm excited. In the next 4, we're going to really be diving into the issue of our relationships directly with our parents, but we needed this as a foundation because if I don't understand who I am with Jesus, I'm not going to understand who I am supposed to be with anybody else. So if you have any questions, just email me and let me know. I'm excited to see how God's going to use it this week.